My intent, though, this is very important to understand. My intent is not to offend people. There's really no value in offending people. But what I'm attempting to do is to plant seeds that look at something from a perspective that some of you, maybe listening for the first time online, have never heard before. I think it's important to hear it, think about it, and then if you disagree with it, that's fine. But don't have a reflex where you just reject it, okay? Now, why is that? Well, after 36 years in a full-time ministry, I've run into easily a couple thousand couples that are struggling in their marriage, okay? Carl and Samantha, for instance. And the biggest issue with Carl and Samantha is, they've been married about, maybe 12, 13 years. They have a couple of kids, and they're in marriage counseling. And because they're really struggling. And the reason why, when you boil it all down, is this, is that Samantha is a feminist and a traditionalist, right? Sometimes she's a feminist, and she's like, girl power and equality, all that. And then other times in her marriage, she's a traditionalist. She's like, well, you're the man, and you should do this and be this and so forth. And Carl is a feminist, and he's a traditionalist, right? And here's why they have problems. When you boil it all down and strip all the accusations away, boil it all down is when her feminism, right, and his traditionalism don't match up. And her traditionalism and his feminism don't match up. In other words, when she's a feminist, she does not want him to be a traditionalist. But when she's a traditionalist, right, she wants him to be a traditionalist, but he's not. He's a feminist. And that, at its core, is a big problem. This whole series is called Desperado, and we're going to talk about why men are going their own way. Quick review, men are increasingly going it on their own. It's not good for them, and it's not good for women. It's not good for kids. It's not good for society. It's not good for anything, anywhere, okay? Number two, we talked about how masculinity is the answer, not the problem. But our world today thinks masculinity is the problem. Last week, Zach talked about how there's a path to discovering your masculinity in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. But very few men are actually able to walk that. So why are men going it alone? Why are they confused about what it means to be a true man? Why are they living in a world that doesn't want them to actually discover their masculinity? So what we're going to talk about today specifically is that in order for you to walk the path of masculinity, in order for you to discover masculinity, you first and foremost must be set free to do it. You must be set free to do it. Otherwise, you will never walk in it and discover it. There's a gravity of the world. It's like the gravity well of a black hole. And what it does is it sucks you in. And you have to overcome this gravity. And unless you've been set free from the gravity of society and the world in which you live, then you'll never actually be able to understand and grow in it. Discipline equals freedom. Most people think freedom is doing what? Anything you want whenever you feel like it. That is not freedom. That's bondage. See, only a boy thinks that way. You start to realize when you are a man, it's the more disciplined I am, the more freedom I possess. Now, this points to a very important spiritual principle that you need to understand. Because even though you can discipline yourself to go through a difficult time, you can discipline yourself as a man to achieve goals in life that bring more freedom in life, if your soul and your spiritual life is not in order as well, all this earthly success will still leave you empty and wondering why you're doing what you're doing, okay? So there's a spiritual component that you, as a guy, have to answer. And so this earthly notion, discipline brings freedom. Guess what? Authority and power brings spiritual freedom. The point, though, is this, is that Beelzebub is a Greek derivative of Baal or Baal. And Baal was the fertility god of the Philistines. And he was a sex god. So what they're doing is they're saying this is, it's a kind of like a taint of a sex thing that's going on with Jesus and why he has this power, which is really interesting that they would use that, because look at what happens next. So Jesus then calls them over and he begins to speak to them. So he has a conversation with them, and this is what he says. How can Satan, so he goes from Beelzebub, that derivative or that moniker, to Lucifer or Satan, right? The king of this world and the authority that the God of this world has, Satan or Lucifer. So he says, how can Satan drive out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan opposes himself and is divided, he cannot stand. His end can come, or his end is come. Now notice what he does here. He says, what he's doing is he's using logic in its axiomatic logic. In other words, he's saying, well, if you drop an apple, it falls to the ground. So that's an appeal to what? The law of gravity. It's a law that everybody accepts. And what's the first? It goes, look, here's an axiom. Axiom means it's a truth no matter what, like the law of gravity, right? So this axiomatic truth is what? That a kingdom cannot stand if it's divided against itself. Then he personalizes it. Your house, right? Your family cannot stand if it's divided against itself. And ultimately Satan. So he goes from king to house to individual. Okay? He says that individual, if he's opposing himself, how in the world is that going to work? So what he's doing is doing a couple things. He's using this form of logic, but he's also pointing out the nature of Satan. Okay, so Satan is a god of this world, right? Satan has a household, and Satan has authority in a kingdom. Now, I want you to notice a couple things about this passage. Number one is, what's really interesting is notice how no one questions the power of Jesus. His disciples, of course, didn't. All those crowds following him wanted it, but his family, who thought he was out of his mind, crazy, guess what? They didn't deny it. And who else didn't deny it? His critics. Because they used an argument that he's doing all this stuff from the power of Satan. So everybody admits that Jesus is exhibiting really incredible power. The second thing is Jesus uses logic to show how they are wrong, and the logical argument he makes has incredible implications for you and for me. And here, guys, is what I want you to understand. Jesus says, in fact, no one can enter a strong man's house without first tying him up. Once he's tied up, he can plunder your house. Once you're tied up, he can plunder your house. And you guys live in a world that has spent your entire life binding you up. And the problem isn't that you're so messed up and it's all your fault. The problem is the world has bound you up that you have no idea what it means to be free and walk in true manhood. I wouldn't say it's your fault. It's the fault of the world you live in. And if anything, you need to take responsibility for the fact that you listened to it and believed it. This is where it gets salty, my friends. Number one, you have to understand that you have been bound and Satan is plundering your house. The first thing he's doing is he's stealing the peace and strength of your soul. A man created in the image of God, given a mission and purpose in life, and you're walking through life wondering, why am I even here, and does anything I ever do make any difference at all? That is a deception because Satan has stolen, he's plundered your purpose. He's plundered your mission. He's plundered your passion. He's stolen it from you. because he bound you up. How in the world did he do that? Because you live in a world that has bound you up through your own sexual desire. That's number one. There's like 3 or 4. I'll go through all of them. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, it says the following: flee from sexual immorality. He doesn't say flee from sex. Okay, your sexual drive, guys, is a God-given drive within you that is awesome. But what happens is immorality is the perversion of that drive. And why does he say flee it? Because all other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually is sinning against who? Yourself. Did you get that? It's against you. And it messes you up like never before. Satan then binds you up through that, and guess what? He robs you of love. He robs you. He plunders your house. He messes up your marriage. He messes up your dating life. He messes up your kids. He can come in. When he gets that, you tied up, he can plunder you. And you live in a world that is geared 100% towards putting those bonds around you as a man. Men are assaulted with sexuality every single day. It is used to get you, manipulate you to buy cars, buy motorcycles, buy yogurt and body wash. And this is very important to understand. This is the whole point of this message right here. It all comes to this point right here, right now. Very important to grab a hold of it, and that is the power to unbind you is an issue of authority in your life. And you must establish the authority in your life that has the power to break the binds. And who has the power to break the binds in the story? Even the critics who wanted to lock him up admitted Jesus has the power to set you free, to get the binds off of you, to be the strong man that you are called to be. The purpose of Jesus is to set you free. Boys think, oh, freedom is to do whatever I want. But on an earthly plane, discipline equals what? Freedom. On a spiritual plane, authority equals power to be free. And there's only one way to be a man, to be a masculine man, to become who you're meant to be, is when you settle the issue of authority in your life. That's how you live as a masculine man. And if you believe the teachings of this world, you're going to say, well, this is my authority. I'm my authority. And if you're your authority, if you're the driver of your life, you have no power. You have no power to ever be free and to be the strong man that protects his house, which begins with your soul. That's why Jesus said the most important words ever. If you want to follow me, you must what? Deny yourself. Why does he say that? Because it's an issue of authority. See, what he's saying is that you want the power to be free. You want the power to have these chains broken away from you. You want to have power over these things in this world that want to manipulate you and destroy you and bind you up so that Satan can come in and plunder your house, plunder your soul, plunder your marriage, plunder your kids, plunder your legacy, plunder your work, plunder everything about you. Well, the only way to break that, stop that, ruin it, and say no more, not today, is to say, Jesus is my king. I'm not my king. Jesus is my king because he is my authority, and his authority has the power over my life and to change me. And when Jesus is your king, when Jesus is your authority, and Jesus is your power, you leave the kingdom of this world and you start living in the kingdom of God. And in the kingdom of God, all men are powerful. Let's stand for closing prayer.